person group, but I'm sure there's a much larger group out there in Uber space, live streaming, Zoom, and all the other new features of communications. This is the 118th session of this ministry since we started at October of 2009, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Paula Lillard-Preslak. Welcome.
Thank you.
I will introduce Paula in a minute. Before that, just two quick administrative items. The first, if you're enjoying faith work, we invite you to support this ministry. Live streaming costs each month and other costs. Last month, for example, we had a very nice $500 donation from a non-parishioner. Giving is easy. Please take a look at the bottom of the screen. You may text or use the QBR code. For your information, we've been averaging more than 10,000 views within a couple of weeks of the initial screening. Up to 30,000 was the record so far. So we trust you have found the sessions interesting and inspiring. Thank you very much. And second, as we normally do, we start with a prayer. Luke?
Special prayer for Paula Lillard-Preslak being our guest today. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
O divine creator of children's souls, what a brilliant design you have given to all humankind. Jesus educated his disciples by placing a child in their midst. May we hearken and behold for ourselves the graciousness with which God has endowed human souls. Give a natural, beautiful, peaceful, engaging environment where children will bloom before your eyes, O Lord, like spring flowers. Thank you, Lord, for Maria Montessori and many others who have learned and taught her ways, and especially for our own treasured Paula Lillard-Preslak. May she continue to help us behold and hearken the natural, beautiful, peaceful child soul, still alive and lovable, deep within each of us. All this we pray in the name of our Master, Teacher, Christ Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Father Luke. Can you hear me well now? Well, we'll just hear the belts and suspenders approach. But before introducing Paula, just a quick reminder, what we typically cover in these sessions are three big items, quote-unquote big items, and the life story of the speaker. Second, the faith journey, any epiphanies. And third, and most important, how does the speaker bring faith to work? We've had terrific speakers from all walks of life. And I do mean all walks of life, from executives to social workers, principals, doctors, a just released prisoner, chief medical officers, people of different faiths. But the one thing that has been very consistent, all stories have been very unique, very personal, and quite inspiring. And I know today will be certainly not be an exception from the number of sessions that Paul and I have had already. It's been really a joy to get to know you better. Hopefully you've seen her biography. I'll just cover a few items from it. But Paul and her family moved to Lake Forest when she was 2 years old. She was the youngest of 5 girls, and they've been members of CHS ever since. Paul is a writer and a great speaker. She has spent 25 years as a leader, as a teacher, and the head of the school at Forest Bluff School. And she just released a wonderful book, The Montessori Potential: How to Foster Independence, Respect, and Joy in Every Child. I really encourage you to get a copy of that book. Just a wonderful way to really how to ensure that the maximum potential is reached for each child. Also, Paula is a person of a deep faith, as you're going to note. She's married to Jim Preslak. They have 2 children, Stanley and Lillard. So I can go on for a long time. I'll stop right there with the intro. Paula, we're going to go for about 30 minutes. and then we'll get Q&As from people from the audience, but also people will be sending questions. If I'm looking at my iPhone, I'm not doing texting or emails, but I'll be looking at questions for you. But again, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe to start, maybe what brought you to Lake Forest and some of the circumstances around that?
Right, thank you. So yes, we came here. I'm the youngest of 5 daughters, as Mike said, and we came when I was about 2 years old. My sisters were 10, 12, 14, and 16 when we came. So in a way, I'm from a big family, but I also was alone quite a bit, being separated by age. And in terms of my faith journey, which I'll just weave in here, I remember from a very young age my mother talking about God quite openly. We said prayers every night, and she talked about God talking to us and us talking to God. She talked about God being in the sky and the trees and inside of us and with us all the time. So I grew up feeling a sense of security and comfort in that. We grew up on Waukegan Road, sort of out in the woods over there, and we had a lot of animals, and many of our animals died. I remember very distinctly when they died, and praying for them, and that whole experience of being a little bit on a farm in that sense and out in nature quite a bit, most of the time actually outside and playing outside. The first time that I had an experience of finding that other people didn't feel the same way was when I was about 13. And my mother and I, we came here. I don't remember coming to church as a family, but as an individual, I remember coming with my mother pretty much every Sunday, probably from the time I was about 7. And we would sit right about there, or right over here in these pews, and the chairs were all black at that time. The church looked quite different. Clark Grew was our minister, and so that was very much a part of my life and routine, was every Sunday going to church with my mother, and got confirmed here. But when I was about 13, I went to Teton Valley Ranch Camp, which at the time was in Teton Valley. It was across the valley looking right at the Tetons. And if you've ever seen pictures or been there, very, very striking mountains. I used to think of the Grand Teton as being God. I mean, it was just so solid and so magnificent. So it felt like a very spiritual place to us. And many of the songs we sang were about the peace of being in nature, the strength we get from the mountains and our experiences in there, and the sound of the river and the breeze in the trees. And so I shared that sense with my camp mates. And we were the same group going through for about 4 or 5 years, so we were very, very close friends. And there was a time where we would go, once a week we had chapel. They called it chapel, but it was non-denominational, and we would go up this hill to a place on the hill where we'd look out at the Tetons, and we just had quiet time. There were some prayers, and I remember one time coming back to our cabin, and afterwards we had to clean the cabin. It's like silent time. The counselors all went off to have a meeting, and it was like free for all, but we were supposed to clean the cabin. And we were doing that, and one of my close friends said, gosh, I love chapel. I look forward to it every week, but I wish they'd keep this stupid God thing out of it. And she said, I just hate when they talk about God. Why do they have to do that? I don't believe in God. And it was, 13 I was about 13. It was so striking, and it really hurt. It felt like, how can you not believe in God, and how can you talk that way? But it also felt like a personal attack. And so I was crying, and my counselor came back. There was always drama that happened when the counselors went up after chapel. But anyway, this was my drama. And I'll never forget, she came up, and I was on the top bunk, and she came up and she put her face close to mine, and she said, what's going on? And I told her, And she said, you know, people are going to act that way and people are going to say things like that in your life. And I've had that experience too. But you have your faith, and that's okay. People aren't always going to agree with you, but you can still be friends. And whatever it was along those lines that she said, it made a really big impact on me. It was a complete release of, okay, she doesn't believe in God, that's okay, we can still be close friends, and it's okay that I do. So that was a really striking moment that I remember in my faith journey. And the second that stands out for me actually took place in the same place. Yeah. So during my teens, sometime after that, I got confirmed here, and in my teens, I kind of did that drift that some of us go through in our lives as a teenager. I went to an Episcopal boarding school, and I skipped chapel all the time and got in trouble for it. I felt very cynical. I was, I don't know if I believe in God, kind of going through all of that. And when I graduated from college, I went back to that camp to be a counselor. So I'd gone to the camp for 4 or 5 years as a young person, and now I was back as a counselor. And I was a co-counselor in that same cabin, actually. It was a large cabin, so there were 2 of us counselors. And the co-counselor, she was in her early 20s, I was in my early 20s. She was very enthusiastic, kind of born-again Christian. And she read the Bible every day, and she talked about God very openly. And, I remember really well coming into the cabin, and she was coming out in the morning. It must have been one of our first days, and I was just getting to know her, that I remember this. And I came up the steps, and she said, "Oh, Paula, isn't it a beautiful day? Don't you just love Jesus? Aren't we so blessed? I just love Jesus." And she just was so comfortable with that language. And I remember, here I was kind of coming off of this cynical stage of my life, and it struck me so much that this person was so happy and that she felt so confident. And as I was around her during the summer, I kind of picked up on this sense that there was joy to be had, that there was strength to be found, and that it was there for us. And just being in the mountains and feeling that power again and that spirituality, it just sank into me. And then when I went back to graduate school, I was in Washington, D.C., I started to wander down the street to go into the Episcopal church that was near me, and it was very different from here. Everybody sang and jumped up and down and hugged each other, and the bread was real, it was like a loaf of bread, and it was very different, but I loved it. I found that it helped me feel peaceful. I was living by myself. It was a very isolating experience in a way, being there by myself, living in an apartment, not really knowing anyone in DC. And this gave me a real sense of community and strength. So that brought me to here, moving back here and becoming a teacher. And I started coming to Church of the Holy Spirit to the Tuesday mornings, right? George Council was doing Tuesday mornings at that time, and I think we had some of the old dogs were in our group. We'd be right up there.
Before the young pups, right?
Yep, right. I guess. There were just old dogs as far as I knew. I didn't know any young pups at that time.
Listeners, that's a Bible study. We have 2 Bible study groups here. One is young pups, and the other is old dogs, and it's self-described, if you will, groups. But anyway. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think those gentlemen were very comfortable calling themselves the old dogs. So that began really my adult life of loving coming to church and being here again. And then at graduate school, was really to become a Montessori teacher. So that was a very spiritual experience for me. Montessori, I thought I wanted to be a horse trainer, and I knew that I wanted to do something positive, helping other people in my life. And I thought I was going to do that through helping people with horses and working with horses and people. teaching children, helping people to be more brave, helping them to be more patient, all the lessons that we could learn from working with horses. But I needed a salary and I needed security, and I looked into teaching in a school setting, and my experiences of school weren't entirely positive, so I didn't know that I wanted to be in a classroom, but I thought I would go and take this training. And right away from the beginning, as I sat there in the first few days and started to learn about and hear about Montessori's vision of education and her approach to children, I learned a whole new way of looking at children. And people talk about this as a spiritual transformation. Maria Montessori called it a spiritual transformation that happens to people when they want to become a teacher, is that we have to learn to see the power that is in each child and the inner drives that nature puts into us as human beings, and our job is to foster and help that process. And that to me was completely different. I mean, for most people, that's a completely different way of looking at teaching, not as a transfer of information, which is the model that we still really have in our country, is the transfer of information from the adult to the child. Now let's see if you've got it, and we're going to test you and give it back to me. Instead, it is, there is something awesome going on inside this child. And Montessori said we have to have awe for that. And she was a very spiritual person. She believed that it was God's energy in each child, guiding that child to what they needed to learn from the environment, and that we're there to assist that process. So everything you do then is in relation to that belief, and it makes for a very different experience of school. So it became a joyful thing then to be a teacher and be with these children who are interacting with the environment, all growing and changing, and you're there helping. And I found that as a happy home for me and a great match for my personality, because I'm always wanting to help other people and to be positive and to kind of free that energy, because to see what's possible with children when you do that is, and with adults too, is inspiring, and it makes it a better place.
As we spoke yesterday, I mean, from the previous 117 speakers, quite a few have been searching for their calling, if you will. What is your purpose in life, and how do you know that your current profession is actually the calling while you're on this earth for? And I made the observation, I mean, you're probably as close to being the perfect match, at least, looking from across the table from you. Any comments how you think about that being your calling? And also maybe fast forward, I mean, you provide such a wonderful illustration how Montessori system works. You're also very open, it does not work all the time, and the reasons it doesn't. But anyway, just maybe a couple of comments, how you think would that be your calling and the next steps on this wonderful journey you have.
Right. Okay. Well, I did feel when I was, sitting in that chair in those rows listening to our trainer and becoming a Montessori teacher, I did feel a sense of calling, for sure. But I don't know that I always felt I was in the right spot. I mean, I think I've struggled as much as many people in wondering if this is what you should be doing every day. I certainly loved being a teacher. I loved being in the classroom. I would love to go back to that and be in the classroom again in stages of my life. I can definitely picture that. It's where the joy is with the children. But being ahead of school was something that I didn't feel was a calling. I was asked to do it. I was asked to do it. I did it willingly in service to the community. It was challenging for me. I think my personality is more to follow and help others, but not kind of be the one out in front on the stage, so to speak. And being head of school was very hard for me. It was something that I did because I felt I needed to for the community. But I spent a lot of time trying to find somebody else to replace me. And it finally worked. It finally worked. There were definitely years, I mean, I can relate very much to people feeling a sense of struggle in, is this what I should be doing? Is this really my personality? You know, because I did have that feeling. In that position. At the same time, I can talk about this, you know, later this morning, about all the places where I brought my faith to that position. But out of that position, finding an amazing person to fill my place, I really love being a writer and speaker because I feel very much that this is the way to help people learn about Montessori and spread it to more children and to more families. And two reasons I wrote this book, and people ask me sometimes why I wrote it. I've had so many of the same conversation twice. One conversation is people telling me, oh, I've heard of Montessori, and then they tell me what they've heard or what their impression is, and it's so off. And that frustration and feeling somebody's got to let people know the real story and how much potential there is there and what's behind it. But the other conversation I've had so many times that really motivated me and motivates me now is having a conversation with someone and having them say, that sounds so amazing. I wish I'd known about it when my children were young. And then they'll say, 2 of my children, they were fine in school, you know, they went through school and they did okay and everything was great. But my other child really struggled, and he would be a totally different person today, I think, if he'd had the kind of experience that you're describing. And I wish I'd known about it. And so for those individuals, I just feel so compelled to try to get the message out in this way.
We had our youngest son, Todd, and his wife, Caroline, for dinner last night. They have a 15-month-old.
Oh.
And I guess you ran into him at an airport a couple weeks ago.
That's right, that's right.
Actually, they saw the book and they didn't realize we'll be speaking this morning. So at least you've started there with the kids at the
I talk to people in airports.
Why don't you mention some of the epiphanies, not epiphanies, but experiences where you brought actually faith at the workplace and maybe a couple of the challenges you mentioned?
Yeah. Well, certainly as a teacher every day, wanting to help children and wanting to do the right thing, and I certainly prayed often, especially with children with whom I had more challenges. But I would say as a head of school, one story that comes to mind, one time that comes to mind where I really felt the power of prayer was I was having a rough time with a colleague, an employee, and she or he, I won't identify, had been kind of talking back to me in front of people and being disrespectful and really clearly having a hard time, saying negative things about me when I wasn't there. I was really struggling with them, and I thought a lot about the different ways that I could handle it. I could sit them down and say, this is not acceptable. I could sit down and say, what's going on with you? This is really upsetting. I thought of these different scenarios, and I thought about it for several days, and I prayed about it. You know, what is the best way to handle this? And when you're leading a group of teachers, just like leading any group, my goal was always to support them to do the best they could for the children. I wanted them to be able to give their best to the children every day. So whatever I needed to do to keep them, you know, their spirits up, their strength, their positivity, feeling good about themselves, you know, just like you would with a child. And there's a child inside every one of us.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we're all children inside, really. I mean, we're just as insecure and worried and as we are when we're young. So I thought about this a lot, and it was a difficult time too, where there's a lot going on. So it was hard to find the time even of when I would be able to have such a conversation with the person. And it was in the morning, and I was leaving quickly. I was a little late leaving the kitchen, and Jim, my husband, came in from Young Pups, the prayer group that you were talking about. And he came in, and as he often did, he said, "Oh, stop, I want to give you a hug. You look so beautiful." And it's like, "I gotta go, and I'm in a hurry. I don't have time for a hug." And he kind of stopped me and took me by the shoulders and said, "I want you to know how much I appreciate you. And how much I love you." And, so I was like, okay, stop and hug, So we hugged for a moment, and I felt this peace wash over me, and I felt, this has happened many times in our marriage, where I feel he gets so much from his experiences at Young Pups that he brings to us. And as I walked out the door to the car, it was like an epiphany of, this is what matters. It's God's love. How can I give God's love to this person? This person is obviously suffering. So I started thinking about all the things going on in their life. Things with their family, things in their personal life, things with their classroom, all the things they were dealing with. We had the pandemic going on at the same time, everything that was crushing. And I thought, this isn't who this person is, to say these things, to act this way. And so I'm just going to make it my goal to affirm and support. And I came up to their door, and they opened it, and we're in a hurry because school's starting, and I said, "I just want to take a moment to tell you how much I appreciate you. You work so hard as a teacher. You're doing such an incredible job." And I mentioned a few things that I'd noticed. And I know you're working really hard and giving your all. And they actually burst into tears. And we hugged, and I realized that was all that was needed. And it just solved everything. We just never had an issue again. And it was a real learning experience for me of drawing on that power and that love and trying to give it to somebody, quite literally, and the healing that happens with that. So that was one very strong experience that comes to mind. And I don't know that I've always handled things, in the optimal way, but I've always tried to be, honest and make that connection with people. And there were certainly times when I was being attacked by parents, or people were accusing me of something that sometimes wasn't my decision or wasn't me, but as the leader, you have to be the one that's, you could call it protecting others or representing a group. And I think that happens for any CEO or leader who's leading a business or a group. And I tried to think of a story, Mike, to share, but I couldn't think of anything without, it's all private, right? It's confidential, so I couldn't really think of a story that I could share. But I do know that what I always tried to do was, I knew in the end I would have my integrity, even if I didn't have my reputation. So there were times when I had to try to help people to trust me, but I couldn't tell them everything, and I had to allow them to think I was a bad person or that I didn't do a good job with something, because if I told them the real story, I'd be throwing somebody else under the bus, and that was too important.
Well, thank you for sharing this, and I know, as we're discussing a couple times, preparing for this, I know how much time and reflection you gave, so thank you. And by the way, as I told you, Jim brings your name up at least a couple times a month, as the Young Pups can attest to. Always very, very positive. So anyway, that's cute to see, almost like two teenagers still continue to be in love, so it's great to see. You also gave me I know when George Consul married you guys 20 plus years ago, he said he is one of the quote unquote instructions were to encourage you to be the Jesus for each other.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have some fun with that over the
Jim
years.
mentions that pretty much every day. Are you being Jesus for me right now? Am I being Jesus for you? It's, he does not let go of that. Jim is definitely the Jesus in our relationship. He is definitely the Jesus, always working hard. I mean, thank you, George. I really do have the best husband. He works really hard to be the best he could be at everything that he does, and so.
A related softball question. Tell us a little bit about your family. How'd you and Jim meet, and something with your two kids?
Yeah. Well, Jim and I met right after graduate school. We were both living here, and it was our mother's idea that we meet each other, but it wasn't so much of a setup like a date. It was more like, I remember my mother very distinctly, I remember her saying, maybe he'll have nice friends. So we were really, we got together at something very casual together. Really the point was to just meet each other. I didn't really know many people around, and he was just back into town. He had plenty of friends, but I needed friends. So I remember when he called too, and he said, my mother told me to call you. And I said, you poor thing. I'm so sorry about that. So when we got together, we definitely, what was great about that is we were just approaching it as being friends, and so we just were ourselves and very honest with each other. But he made me laugh, and we had a great time, and the rest is history. Yeah. And then we have two children. So we were married here by George Council in this church. We had Stanley, who's now 21, and Lillard, who's now 19. And they both grew up coming here. We'd sit right in the front row so they could see everything right over there, sometimes for just 15 minutes, but whatever it took, raised them here in the church as many Sundays as we could. And then they both went through the choir program as well. So we tried to get a lot of their experience at Church of the Holy Spirit in there.
I have 20 more questions. I'll probably do a couple more. If there's any questions from this group, or follow the instructions on live streaming, and I'll get those on my iPhone. But how would you, I mean, you're in the midst of this book, it's getting great acclaim, but what are your personal and professional goals for the next, say, 5, 10, 15 years? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I definitely want to, I'll be doing this for a while of trying to get the book out to people, and Montessori is all around the world, so it's in just about every country in the world, and really amazing things are happening with Montessori in prisons, in displaced persons camps in Africa, in the most distressed areas everywhere. And I would really like to, when I'm finished kind of trying to get this out to people, is to help with some of those situations and help to get schools started in places where people want them. And the motto that Montessori used is that the child is saying to us, help me to help myself. And that's the same way we can approach adults, is people want, they don't want people to do something for them, they want some help in doing for themselves what they need. And so there are communities that would really love to have a type of school like this, and there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to have that. So I think that's really where my energy will go next, is in doing that. I'm excited. I've got a couple trips planned already to go and see other communities, and up near Minnesota, for instance, there are a bunch of schools that have gotten started. In the Hmong community, they started their own Montessori school. In a Latino community, in the Lakota community. So these community schools are really interesting to me, these Montessori schools in different communities, because...
I mean, I understand, there's public schools that also follow this model.
Public Montessori programs. And what makes it so adaptable or so adjustable is that Maria Montessori believed it shouldn't be religious, it shouldn't be... she was very against indoctrination of any kind, and she believed that in free will and liberty. And so people are able to take the model of treating children as forming themselves and support them with a prepared environment, in the classroom by modeling for them and linking them to information, and then by giving them certain freedoms and responsibilities or choices and boundaries. And that can be applied to any language, any culture, any practices, any religion. So it becomes the life and the culture of that place and that community of children. So it's very adaptable in that way.
I mean, it's amazing just for the listeners, I mean, the 8 traits, which the process really encourages and fosters, is engagement, focus, organization, curiosity, courage, collaboration, respect, and resourcefulness. Mm-hmm. Really great examples in the book how those traits are actually being developed and really becoming part of the individuals, part of the students going through the programs. Very, very inspiring. Tell me about your spiritual routines. Whether it's a prayer life or groups that you may go. I know nature is important to you, but any comments there?
Yes. Well, I try to come to church as much as I can on Sundays, but
at 7:30?
Sometimes I come to the 7:30. That's true. I don't currently have a routine that I'm proud of. I'm going to be really humble here and just say it's something I struggle with. I think I struggle with routine in my life in general. I wake up and I just start going. But periods of my life, I have sat down and prayed in the morning when I first woke up, meditated, which I also consider prayer. Mm-hmm. I definitely talk to God a lot in terms of these kind of arrow prayers. You know, I'm driving, I'll hear a siren, say a prayer for, whatever's happening there, pray for help. I do definitely sit down and take a moment before I'm going to do something that I really want to have be effective. But I don't have any, anything to, I'm learning. I'm learning.
Who are some of your heroes or role models or mentors? I mean, any one of those categories, if you will?
Well, I have to say my husband Jim is one of my heroes for sure, right away. Partly because of that determination that he has of wanting to be the best person that he can be and be giving to others and care about others. He doesn't stop. He doesn't want to, there's always more to do. He'll always be the last person out there, but he also stands up for what he believes in. He doesn't let things slide if he doesn't agree. And I really admire that strength. I would say Maria Montessori is definitely somebody that I so strongly admire. She was one of the first women to graduate from the University of Rome in the late 1800s, which was unheard of in that time. And then she was the first woman to graduate from the medical school, as she was valedictorian of her class, and she was the only woman. And really struggled. She struggled a lot in her life. She would start these ideas and get school started, and then Hitler would shut them down. Mussolini would shut them down. She lived through, 2 world wars. She saw a lot of evil in her life. She was in India for 7 years, where she had to stay there during World War II. And that actually really helped her to develop a whole other way, kind of looking at Hinduism and other religions and kind of bringing in this idea of how connected we all are. And the universe, and helping children to understand that in a historical sense. So she's definitely one of my heroes. My father, for his honesty. My father has just maybe one of those rare human beings who's never told a lie. And my mother for her determination and what a cheerleader she is for other people, always trying to cheer other people. And I could go on with so many other heroes that I have. I'm always looking to learn from others, so a long list.
Questions from here?
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Paula. So having 3 children at Forest Bluff School, I get to hear at parent nights from you and other educators there about Montessori teaching and different aspects of it, which is really inspiring. But there are some times when I walk away having heard a very inspiring talk, thinking, this is the solution to world peace. Like, this is it. This is how we're going to raise the next generations to get along across the globe. This is it. They're doing it. It's happening here in Lake Bluff, Illinois. So having just explained this bit about Maria Montessori's background experience, what she was living through while she was developing all of this and all of her ideas and writing about them, can you speak to how that experience and her own faith translates into someone like me kind of showing up and hearing about it and watching it in my own children day to day, thinking this is it, world peace is possible,
Right.
and this model could really get us there. Can you speak to, like, I think it is influenced by her faith.
That's an amazing question, Lucy. You went straight to the punch, which is, this is what Maria Montessori talked about. In many of her lectures, she talked to large groups of people, and it's why I think she had such a following, if you will, is she talked about world peace. And she wasn't the only one, obviously. She was living in a time when people were talking about how are we going to solve these problems. We have world wars happening. How are we going to avoid another one? What do we do about Hitler and all of this? And she really tried to guide people to the fact that it was through children that we're going to make a difference in the future. And you're absolutely right. I do believe really strongly that we will have a more peaceful world if we can treat children in such a way that is not violating to them, but really does honor who they really are, helps them to feel whole and dignified and be respected, and they then give that to others. And it's in so many little things that we do, the grace and courtesy of how we treat them, but it's also how we think of the transfer of knowledge, how we help them to learn through a material instead of telling them you're wrong and grading and everything that we put children through in our schools. So it's very much the way to change things, and she talked about that quite a lot. I don't know that she even thought that a completely peaceful world was possible. I think that she also had a lot of respect for the reality of human nature, and that human nature will always have a struggle, that there will always be undesirable qualities in every human being, and we see that in children. Children will be mean to each other. Children will experience all of those parts of being human, and that the best we can do is to support them through that and try to help guide them and provide an environment where they work that out, and we will have many more peaceful people because of that. But I don't think that she really believed in a utopia. I think that she believed we could do better. So I love that you mentioned that and that you've had that experience as a parent. And I just met somebody the other day you wouldn't even believe was somebody who's going to be DJing a party for us. And I was talking to him on Zoom about the disco music that we're going to have. And he mentioned that he had children. And I very quickly started asking about them. They go to a Montessori school in Chicago. And he said, I believe it's the way of the future. We're going to change the world. This is the way it should be done. And I said, okay, we're really going to have a good time meeting. But that, you want to see Montessori happening in all these different places, and you want to see it be available to everybody who wants it. So thanks for that question. I hope that answers.
2 questions from online. Actually, one is a suggestion. If people want to give to faith at work, how they do that. So, Stu, if you guys can post it on the screen behind me, that'd be helpful. And the other question is, we'd love to hear more about your book. Can you talk a little bit about the fatherly advice you wrote about?
About the fatherly?
The fatherly advice?
Fatherly advice? Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's a chapter about for parents specifically at home. And so when I go around and speak, I'm often talking to parent audiences. And I talk quite a bit about the ways that we can treat our children at home and the ways we can raise them at home to help them develop the kind of traits that we're talking about in the book. Because it doesn't just happen at school, obviously, and it's about switching that dynamic. So, interestingly, I was in an airport recently, and I'm really heartened by what I've seen lately. You know, you often see children strapped in. You know, you think about, okay, the child is trying to interact with the environment and learn from the environment, put everything in their mouths, and this is how we learn as human beings. And then you see the child strapped in with the pacifier and the screen in front of them, and the adults are basically saying, don't move, don't interact with us, don't touch anything, just, you know, stay and wait. Don't grow, don't progress, don't do what nature is driving you to do. But I'm so heartened because lately I have seen more and more people interacting with their children on the whole plane ride. You know, just interacting with them, reading to them, people putting their children on the floor so they can crawl around, people letting their child explore the airport and they're going along behind them, a father in particular lately. And I want to run over to them with one of my bookmarks. Like, when it comes time for school, you're going to want this, I can tell. But for a parent to have that dynamic, for a father to have that dynamic with their child of, I can see what you're trying to do, and I'm going to help you, I'm going to guide you a little bit away from the dangers, but I'm going to give you some freedoms and some choices and that are appropriate, and that follows all the way up. So that when they're a teenager, when they're a young adult, all the way through, that we have that dynamic where we're helping. And it doesn't mean that the children are allowed to do anything that they want. It doesn't mean that there's total free-for-all and absolute freedom. I mean, there's boundaries and rules of society that help us to get along, and rules of how we treat each other, including how you treat your parent. And how you treat your teacher and how you treat your classmates. But that dynamic, that shift, is very important, and I think one that I talk for a whole chapter in here at each age and stage, how you would do that and what that looks like physically, what it looks like emotionally, what you do in your interactions that supports that.
Any other questions from here? Rick?
Great.
Well, I don't know you, but I've gotten to know Jim. And
You know me.
Yeah. And I would say he's an I-we person. I-we means intellectual, witty, and edgy. So my question is based on the W. So how do you use humor, which is certainly a part of joy, a major part of joy, how do you use it internally in your family and with your students externally?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, as a family, and you know Jim, so you know we have humor all the time. I grew up being very silly. It was one of the ways I got attention when I was little. I actually, I went to Lake Forest Country Day School. We didn't have Montessori school here when I was young, and I literally got down on my hands and knees and barked at the head of school in front of my mother in first grade. So very silly. So definitely a lot of humor, a lot of playing around as a family. But with students, it's a really interesting question, because one of the things I learned from Montessori is that there are different characteristics and needs at each stage of life, developmentally. So when a child's under the age of 6, you know, from birth to 6, humor is part of your life, of course. But if I, as a teacher, and I did make this mistake right out of the gate, if you're silly with the children in class, with the 3 to 6-year-olds, you've got 3, 4, 5-year-olds, they will see your face and think we're going to be laughing forever. I mean, every time they see you, they're going to goof around. So you'll never be able to capture their attention again. So with the younger ones, it's more imitation. It's, you know, they imitate you. We don't use humor so much in a teaching way. And we laugh when it's natural, obviously. But with the older ones, 6 to 12 elementary children, humor is huge. It's a way of connecting, and they're going through the developmental stage of learning social dynamics and connections. It's when everybody wants to be in a group, everyone wants to be with their friends all the time, they don't want to be alone, they want to interact. And part of that is humor. So using humor in stories, using humor in the way that you're presenting the work, it is really fun. And I loved when I went from being a primary teacher teaching the younger ones to the elementary. And it's like, finally, I can be silly. And it works, and it actually helps them to learn. So there's different places where humor comes in as a learning tool and helps. Certainly with adolescents as well, although they actually don't appreciate it if you're doing anything that might be making fun of them, because their sense of dignity becomes very strong in those ages. So always following the child and what is the best match for each stage. So thank you.
Quote, to be perfect, to try to be the best, and carries all sort of a maybe unnecessary pressure and burden. So anyway, how do you deal with that? And have you had any personal experiences? And if yes, some of the ways you've been able to help yourself through that process?
Yeah. I would definitely say I've had experiences with that. I mean, I think there's a perfectionist in all of us. It's actually one of the reasons why Montessori pointed out that we don't need to be grading children or pushing them. Nobody is lazy, really. Nobody does a bad job on purpose. Children are always trying to do their best, and we're all trying to do our best as people. I think for me, Mike, I would say that when I was head of school was intense. There were times, especially early on, where I put a lot of pressure on myself to do not only that job, but also be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter, the perfect, parent, everything. And I did actually get myself into a corner where it was hard to breathe, quite literally. And I had the experience of having your body stop you from being able to do what you're doing, which was very scary, because I'd always been able to sort of overpower things and just keep going. I wasn't in a position where I could stop. And actually, the person who helped me the most through that was Frances Murchison, so Jay Sidebotham's wife. So our past rector, his wife was a life coach, and she really helped me through that. Yeah, she really, really saved me through that and taught me to stop thinking how much your thoughts actually dictate for you. It's your idea that's actually affecting you. Is it really true or not, or is it just in your head? And what voices are you listening to? And so I really had to kind of retrain myself to not just go straight to that push, push, push button, which had been so much a part of my life. In our family, we joke that it's the LLIP, it's the Lillard Life Improvement Program. We're all in it, whether we want to be or not. And we've joked around about this for, the last 15 years. So it definitely, it definitely dissolved. It's no longer, we're all supporting each other. But I think inside of us, there is so much that drive to do things well. And sometimes that drive can not serve us well. We have to be able to let go. So.
Maybe I'll ask the softball question, but what are your favorite hobbies? What do you do in your free time?
My free time, I go back to the horses. So that love never ended. I ride every day. I love to be with the animals and ride. And riding for me is also very spiritual in a way. It's a communication. It's a whole conversation that you're having with an animal who doesn't use words, but they use their body. And it kind of helps you get out of your head and into other ways of being. So I love to ride. I do love to write. I mean, I find it just as much a struggle as anybody else, but I love trying to find the words to help people understand or to connect with someone. I love walking in nature and being with family and all those things.
Well, we will have a closing prayer, and I'd like to acknowledge Tim Keller in just a minute, but before that, what a fabulous discussion. We've had many wonderful testimonies in the last 10 plus years, but arguably none better. So
Well, thank you.
thank you for your time, for your preparation, and thank you for being who you are.
Thank you so much, Mike, for having me. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak in this special place. Thank you for what you're doing, and to Stu and Luke, and thank you, all of you,
Bob
for
and Mimi,
being
Merle,
here.
Lucy, we have a wonderful team.
Thank you.
Just really, this is impromptu, but really want to have a prayer for Kathy Keller and her 3 sons. We lost my heroes last week. I mean, arguably one of the giants in the faith movement in the last 100 years, Tim Keller. He has impacted millions of people, myself very specifically included. He's in a very good place now. I am confident of that, but also what's comforting is that his books and his thousands of sermons will be with us in eternity. So again, I just want to ask everyone to have a moment of silence and prayer for Kathy, their 3 boys, and to really recognize and honor the life and of Dr. Tim Keller. Okay. As we normally do, in a close it our Father's prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you so much. Thanks. That was fun.